Hey, what's going on, agents? My name is the Black Link, and today I wanted to talk a bit about a new build that I've been experimenting in the Division 2 Warlords of New York. I've been playing around a lot with this in both challenging and heroic level content. Since we recently got that new update that changed the way a lot of NPCs work, they deal way less damage in both challenging and heroic, and they have way less health and armor. That has allowed for, some different, more experimental type of builds to really flourish in the sandbox right now. You don't have to go full glass cannon anymore. As a matter of fact, while I would still definitely recommend max damage builds for basically anything that you're running, you can actually experiment with some nice tank builds and skill builds and healer builds and stuff now. And this time, I have got a build that does it all. This build is going to revolve around the True Patriot armor set, which of course, like every other gear set, saw a bit of a revamp when Warlords of New York came out, and is actually pretty darn good right now. This build can work as a tank build, it can work as a skill build, it can work as a utility build, and it can work as a DPS or a healer build as well. And as a matter of fact, in this video, I'm going to be showing you a quick kind of mixture between DPS and sustained healing build with True Patriot and a very specific exotic in the Pestilence LMG. This was actually a build that was recommended to me while I was streaming one day by one of my subscribers out there. He's the one who first brought the potential of this build to my attention. And now that that update has gone into effect, lowering damage, and making heroic and challenging content at least a little bit more consistent, I've gone ahead and thrown together a experimental version of this build, and it's worked pretty well in both solo and team-based content. And I'm going to be going over some of the differences of the build there. First things first, I am still utilizing the gunner specialization for this build. There's a lot of great stuff about this. I do utilize mostly LMGs as my weapons here, so getting that LMG bonus plus the plus 50 round magazine is definitely worth your while. Additionally, you also want to get the hardened armor kit ability. Armor kits repair 100% armor and grant 30% bonus armor for 10 seconds. The healing portion of this build, which I've started to call the Plague Doctor build, is going to be pretty important. So the more armor you have, the better off you are. Now, let's take a look at some of the gear itself. Now, this does revolve around the 4-piece True Patriot build. This is the most important thing we've got going. Of course, with 2 pieces of True Patriot, you get plus 30% ammo capacity. With 3 pieces, you get plus 30% magazine size, which is great for LMGs. You're going to get an extra 30 rounds in basically the magazine of stuff like your infantry MG5 and the Pestilence itself. And of course, with 4 pieces, you get the ability red, white, and blue. This is the bread and butter of this gear set. Every 2 seconds, enemies you shoot receive a stacking debuff of red, white, and blue. Red amplifies the enemy's damage taken by 8%. For white, shooting the enemy repairs you and your allies' armor by 5% once every second. And for blue, it decreases the enemy's damage dealt by 8%. Then we've got the full flag ability. Enemies that die while under the effects of all 3 debuffs will create a 5-meter explosion, dealing damage equal to their total health and armor. But that explosion damage is reduced on named enemy deaths. Now, the full flag ability there is pretty nice when you can catch enemies in their spawn, and you catch maybe a heavy enemy and you take him out while everybody's nearby. You can one-shot a lot of mobs with that. But really, that's not the big benefit item here. The big benefit item here is actually the white ability, granting you 5% of your armor back every second while you've got that debuff stacked on an enemy. That is going to be your bread and butter mixed in with the Pestilence here. For the attributes there, I went for maxed out armor, 170,000 points of armor there, and then stuff like armor on kill. But really, you're going to want to go for a bit of damage there. If you can get armor as your main point, you're going to want to fit in maybe as much critical hit chance as you can get. You do also still want to be able to deal damage with this build, and stacking up as much critical hit chance on all the armor as you can is going to be a great way to do that. So I just went for basic armor builds to push my armor up to 1.4 million, and then as much critical hit chance as I could fit in so I could still deal a bit of damage with this build. If you've got the backpack on, you're also going to get the Patriotic Boost ability. This is huge. This talent increases red, white, and blue debuff strength. It takes the red debuff from 8% extra damage to 12% extra damage. You're healing with the armor from 5% to 8% of your total armor. And finally, the enemy debuff of 8% damage resistance to 12% less damage resistance. It's great stuff all around. Other than that, for the basic armor, you actually have a lot of different options here. For me, I just wanted to go for as much red as possible. You want to get a lot of weapon damage, a lot of critical hit chance, and as much critical hit damage as you can stack up in there, just so that you can keep your damage numbers at least at a decent level. If you've got the Coyote's Mask, that'll work fantastic with this build. This is a fantastic DPS exotic out there. If you've gotten to, I think it's rank 25, or 35 rather, on the season pass. This thing usually comes with maxed out weapon damage and close to maxed out critical hit chance and critical hit damage. It's got the ability Pack Instincts, where you and your allies gain a bonus based on the distance of the last enemy you hit. From 0 to 15 meters, you get plus 25% critical hit damage. For 15 to 25 meters, you get plus 10% critical hit damage and plus 10% critical hit chance. And for 25 plus meters, you get plus 25% critical hit chance. It's a great way to supplement some of those red attributes that you're missing out by running the True Patriot build. Would definitely recommend it, especially if you're playing solo. But right now I've just got a bit of Providence gear on for headshot damage, and it's got a lot of critical hit chance on there. I was testing out the chest piece here, the Tardigrade Armor System Exotic chest piece. This is going to be great if you're running in a group. Right now, unfortunately, the white ability here of restoring people's armor doesn't work. It's kind of bugged in group play, so your teammates aren't getting the bonus from that. But once they fix that, Tardigrade is going to be an incredible ability if you're using the healing portion of this build to be your team's medic. This is going to give you a massive amount of bonus armor, 170,000 total armor, plus its special talent, Ablative Nanoplating, where whenever you or your allies' armor breaks, they gain 80% of your total armor as bonus armor for 10 seconds, with a cooldown of 45 seconds unless you get a kill with your specialist weapons. If you whip out your specialist weapon, you get a kill, this immediately cools down so they can just get another 80% of your armor as soon as you or their armor breaks. This is going to be huge for tank builds. You're basically going to be making sure that your teammates, whenever their armor breaks or whenever your armor breaks, they're going to have an instant reserve of a huge amount of bonus health to deal with. It's going to be fantastic with this build, again, when they fix True Patriot so that the buffs actually stack and are shared across your team. Without that, a great replacement would be something like a glass cannon chest piece if you're dealing damage. If you've got the name Providence gear like the Sacrifice, perfect glass cannon is going to work really well with the Coyote Mask gear if you're playing solo content. This is going to be a great damage build, and it's going to make sure that you get a lot of health back without losing too much of the armor there. Now, why does this build work so well? Again, this is going to be tied into the True Patriot's white bonus. This debuff here, or rather buff, shooting the enemy repairs you and your allies' armor by 5% once every second. This mixes in with the Pestilence. This is going to be the exotic of choice that you're going to need to run to make this build work. Pestilence, of course, is an exotic LMG with the ability Plague of the Outcast. Hits apply a debuff dealing 100% weapon damage over 10 seconds. This stacks up to 50 times. Whenever an enemy dies with this debuff, all stacks are transferred to a nearby enemy within 25 meters. This is going to be a huge way to sustain your DPS without having to run full critical hit chance and full critical hit damage. Because of course, as you're landing shots on enemies, you're going to be stacking up a debuff that is eventually going to be dealing massive amounts of damage to them. The thing is, the hits from this debuff, the hits from this dot, actually trigger the abilities from True Patriot. So as long as you've got this dot built up from the Pestilence from landing shots on enemies, you're actually going to be able to take advantage of some of the debuffs of True Patriot. In particular, the dot applied by the Pestilence actually mixes in with the white flag, counting as its own separate individual hit. Meaning if you stack up the Pestilence dot on an enemy that has the white flag debuff, every time they tick for damage from Pestilence, it's going to trigger the armor regeneration that's going to heal you by 8% of your total armor if you're using the backpack there. But it gets even better. This actually counts as a bit of a double buff because the dot from Pestilence counts as its own hit. If you're still shooting enemies and have that white flag debuff on them, you're going to gain armor back from that as well, meaning you can get 16% of your total armor back just by stacking this debuff on enemies and continuing to shoot. It's incredible. As long as you're stacking that debuff on enemies, you're going to be constantly regenerating your own health and applying these debuffs to everything in sight. Now, for those of you out there who don't exactly know how True Patriot works, once you've got 4 pieces of this gear set on, if you head out into the world, you'll start to see the icon of the flag changing every couple of seconds on your shoulder. This is basically going to tell you what debuff your shots are going to apply. And so as you start firing at enemies, you'll see that the whatever color is above your shoulder right there will begin to apply itself to enemies. And this works fantastic with the Pestilence. You can just spray a bunch of enemies and immediately get the benefits of all of these debuffs. And the effects are really, really pronounced. You go to a group of enemies, you don't even have to really focus on one. Just start spraying the entire group to stack as many debuffs as possible. And then you can just start stacking the Pestilence debuff. And as long as you've got that white flag debuff up, every time Pestilence ticks for damage on those enemies, you're going to heal 16% of your total armor. Which when you've got 1 million armor or above is going to be an absolute ton of sustained healing without you having to whip out any sort of skill. This is great for solo play, and once they fix the debuff sharing amongst your teammates, it's going to be amazing for team healing. As you can see, I'm going through a mission here, and basically I don't have to whip out my chem launcher to heal anybody at all. I can just focus straight on damage and stacking these debuffs and creating explosions whenever an enemy with the full flag ability goes down. So you can basically just sit back and enjoy passive healing as you spray crowds of enemies, stack the debuffs on them, and then watch yourself regen any sort of damage that you take. Now, of course, you can still die if you get focused by a lot of enemies, so you're still gonna have to play very carefully in challenging and heroic and legendary level content. But this is a great self-sustaining build. You spread that plague across everybody and you'll be healing any sort of damage that you take in no time flat. And because you haven't completely sacrificed your critical hit chance and critical hit damage, especially if you're using stuff like the Coyote Mask, you're still going to be pushing out a pretty healthy amount of damage, meaning you can use this build to solo content, you can use it in group content. I've run a bunch of heroic missions with this and it works really, really well. And it's a bit more comfortable than running the full glass cannon build since I'm not going to die in one shot and I can heal off a lot of the damage that I'm taking just by killing enemies. This Plague Doctor build is definitely something that I could recommend to all of you agents out there. And again, outside of having to get the Pestilence itself, it's really easy to build. You just really need those 4 pieces of true Patriot gear, and then you can kind of fit in whatever you want. You can mix and match this into a skill build by swapping out the extra armor for skill points, and then you can use it as a full dedicated healer. You could go full DPS, kind of like how I'm going here, with a mixture of armor and then critical hit chance and critical hit damage. You can use this with marksman rifles, assault rifles, shotguns, really whatever you want. This is going to be a build that works for whatever kind of playstyle you've got. I took this out into a lot of content, and at the end of it, I was going for over 25 million in terms of healing, which isn't bad for a dedicated damage build. If you want to go for something like Hardwired for a dedicated healing build, you can of course reach much higher numbers for dedicated healing, but you're basically just sitting back with your chem launcher in hand, shooting it any time your ally's health goes below 50%. Not really dealing a lot of damage to other enemies, and not really being as beneficial to the team as you would be if you had a lot more damage outgoing. But with this build, you can still dish out a lot of damage while keeping yourself safe, and hopefully once they fix this True Patriot thing, keeping your allies safe as well. Again, right now, the white flag armor regeneration is supposed to be happening for you and all of your allies, but it doesn't really proc as consistently as it should. It's one of the gear set things that they need to fix right now. But once they do, this is going to be an incredible team healing build that's going to be able to keep you and your allies in the fight as long as you're taking enemies down. This is going to be a fantastic build moving forward, and I'm looking forward to playing around a lot more with it in the future. Yeah, you could do better healing with a dedicated healing set, but I like being able to deal some damage too. But alright agents, that's it for my Plague Doctor build here in the Division 2 Warlords of New York. Have you played around with the True Patriot set? Do you have any other suggestions for how to make this build even better? Be sure to sound off down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. That's it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I am the Black Link. You agents, stay frosty.